My personal philosophy is it starts with EX, right? And if you are treating your employees differently than you want them to treat your customers, you're playing a very short-term game. You
Mm,
might see some immediate results, but they won't sustain themselves. And so it has to align with how your frontline is treated, that they feel valued, and that their voice is heard, and that they are a meaningful contributor to your organization's targets. And if you treat them with the same level of value and respect that you'd like them to treat your customers with, then a lot of it, I don't want to say it takes care of itself, but a lot of it falls into place.
Welcome to the CX Files. Today's guest is David Ricley. He's the Director of Customer Care at Union Wireless, which is the #1 retail customer service company in Wyoming. As a longtime employee at Union Wireless, he has been instrumental in achieving top-tier customer service that drives long-term subscriptions across all tiers of NPS scores. David, you mentioned before we started today that Union Wireless is a family and employee-owned business. So what are some of the things that Union Wireless does differently to really stand out compared to some of the tier one big corporate providers?
Um, First and foremost is our commitment to customer experience. I think that we offer a relationship-based customer support model that would be very difficult to match at a tier one level, right? It's difficult to scale and it's a more expensive model, but it's been one that we found has allowed us to differentiate ourselves in the marketplace, both where we're the incumbent telephone provider, but also where we are a new entry to a marketplace or in a competitive landscape.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's interesting. Typically, when you talk about relationship-based service, there's typically big contracts involved. It's a B2B, almost a customer success model. So can you talk a little bit more about, how did that get started and what were the kind of the thoughts around that?
Sure. It started with our founder or with kind of our patriarch. His name was Howard Woody. We are in a very rural part of Wyoming. There's about 10,000 people in our small community. 100 plus years ago, it's even smaller by quite a great deal. And so, it was about fulfilling commitments that you made. And a lot of handshakes over barbed wire fences is kind of the term that we use internally. And so it really spawned from that commitment and those timeless ethics of following through on your commitments and being able to look your neighbor in the eye and doing what you say you're going to do. So in each of our locations, we have a list of cowboy ethics. Uh, Cowboys are the mascot for the University of Wyoming, and so it aligns very closely with who we've been for our 110-year history. And so very easy to look at his track record and have that be something that inspires both employees and communities alike.
Absolutely. That's fascinating. I love hearing about, I think there's something about the image of the barbed wire fence and the handshake. There's a contrast there.
Yeah,
And kind of overcoming difficulty, right?
sure.
But also being part of a community, right? I think um, you know, a lot of times companies look at customers as individuals, and there's a
Hmm.
one-to-one relationship between a business and a single customer. But there's actually a community of customers, and the business is kind of a part of that, right?
Hmm.
Um, I want to ask you, can you tell me a story about a really memorable customer experience, either that you've had as a customer or that you've helped with?
Yeah. So, like I said, almost all of Wyoming is rural. I mean, we have two metro areas, both on the eastern side of the state. Um, and everywhere you go, the joke is that we're a small town with long roads in Wyoming. And so when we're deploying physical connections, fiber to the home or otherwise throughout a community, some of our delivery timelines can take longer than some customers would like, right? We're literally micro trenching or plowing through the community. And so if somebody's on the opposite side of the town from where we started, they might not see the timeline or the delivery as rapid as they'd like. And so we had a potential customer who was growing frustrated that his hospitality business wouldn't get connected in the timeline that he was looking for. He was up against his busy season about to start, and he was growing more and more anxious. And so he was concerned that he wasn't being given the priority that he deserved. And like I said, we were fast approaching his busy time of the year. So we were able to work with our construction crew, and it just so happened that we had a government building nearby that was being constructed in the coming weeks. And so we were able to align those two construction projects, get him connected a little bit quicker than we normally would have been, and get his service up and running, which not only allowed us to, check that order off the list, but also allowed him to differentiate himself in the marketplace. He now had the type of connectivity that you would see in an urban center, like a gig or 2 gigs per second fiber speeds at a campground. And now he's become an advocate in the community of ours. And in fact, I think we're interviewing him for a customer testimonial next year. So that's really been, it's those stories like that. There's plenty of them that I could probably draw from, but stories like that where we were able to come through in the clutch from somebody, not only help them personally, help their business, but also help those travelers, right? Who maybe were on their way somewhere else or that was their destination. They're able to either work remote or stay connected with the people that matter to them. Um, those are the type of impacts that really resonate with me and stand out.
Absolutely. And I love hearing about a story where, somebody who was maybe skeptical or critical or frustrated, potentially, and now they've become, almost a super promoter, right? And
Yeah,
a super advocate for you. Um, and those kind of transformational result. And I think those kinds of things are not only do they feel good and not only are they something to be proud of, but it's really great for the business, right?
there's
Um,
such an opportunity there, right? I mean, the customer who's always been happy with you, we appreciate them just as much, right? But they're a little bit less likely to tell their story where they've just always come through, right? But when you have the peaks and valleys of the ebb and flow of the relationship, and they're able to talk about, um, like you said, the shift from frustrated to elated, that really has it, like I said, it resonates with me probably more than the others.
Definitely. So you've worked with Union Wireless for many years, a longtime employee there, and you moved at some point from sales into your current role as Director of
Yeah.
Customer Care.
hmm
Can you talk a little bit about your first experiences in customer care, and is there anything surprising to you that stood out?
Um, probably not a lot that's unique, if I'm being honest. In terms of when I started at Union, it was, seems like ages ago now. When I first started in customer care industry, it was, seems like a century ago. But I was maybe a little shocked or alarmed at how some people express their disappointment or frustration at times.
Hmm.
But, I quickly realized that everybody just wants to be heard. They want somebody to partner with to solve the problems, and actually care about their circumstances. And so once I kind of had that light bulb moment, it was off to the races, so to speak. And then, in any customer care job, you're really afforded what I think is a great opportunity to work with so many different leaders, right? People kind of move in and out of roles regularly in customer support. And so you're exposed to some really exceptional leaders, some less so. But it's almost impossible not to start to begin to craft your own leadership philosophies based on, the variable experiences that you have with a bunch of different people. So um, that's going back all the way to my first role in customer care. But as far as first time in customer care with Union, it was just being impressed by how in such high regard the customers spoke of the customer care experience here. And so it was something that I took a lot of responsibility to make sure that I didn't mess it up. It's like being handed the keys to a Ferrari, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's always um a voice that that the customer care team has, or in other organizations it might be called customer support or customer
hmm
service, right? but but there's always a voice there, an advocacy role, right, to kind of represent the voice of customers, VOC, right? And how do you think about that responsibility and that opportunity?
I mean, it is a big responsibility, and I think maybe bigger at some organizations that it's not quite as highly prioritized as it is at Union. Um, we don't have quite as much credibility to establish here when we walk into the C-suite office to say, "Hey, here's what's happening with our customers. Here's what they need, and here's what's trending." right?
Hmm.
There's been a lot of support all the way through our executive leadership team um, to really be responsive to that and hear what's happening on the front line.
Got it. Well, it's great to have leadership that's responsive and it has an open ear, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, when you think about VOC and kind of sharing that within the organization, is there some kind of processes or specific examples or cases about that you could share?
Um, as far as process is concerned, we kind of use a hybrid approach. We use a OKR framework, and then we use some of Patrick Lencioni's management and leadership philosophies. And so, myself and my peers at the director level meet regularly to discuss status and progress towards those OKRs, objectives and key results.
Right.
How we're making sure that we're pulling the right levers, turning the right knobs, what results we're seeing. We meet for a quick stand-up meeting every single day where we can call out any blockers or discuss things that are happening for that day's agenda within our different groups. And then weekly, we sit down to have kind of a pseudo quick strategic touch base to make sure that we're on track with our key results and our objectives for that quarter. So that philosophy is, or that those frameworks have paid huge dividends for us within our organizational structure, right? Family-owned organizations are unique in the challenges that they face, right? But I think that in contrast to more corporate environments, but they face very specific challenges. They can silo very easily, and so we've used those methods to make sure that there's regular communication across leadership in the organization, so we're all on the same page and working toward the same targets. Those things have also allowed us to give clarity and visibility to every member of our organization so they can see how their roles and their successes contribute to the overall achievement of the organization.
Got it. Yeah, I think there's a lot of teams where, there's all kinds of metrics, there's all kinds of data, there's OKRs, um, you've got KPIs,
Mhm.
you've got all these different things that you're tracking. Um, and how do you think about prioritizing and how do you think about, kind of weaving data in to making a case for something or um yeah, kind of keeping clarity among all the noise that could potentially happen.
Yeah, I think it really just kind of comes down to context, right? I mean, we're all nearing congestion or a congestion point with the data that's available to us. And it's easy to support almost any position with minor data sets that are available from one application or another as you take it to either your peer set or your executive team.
Hmm.
But if you can provide the context and why that measurement matters and how the data you're presenting impacts the organization's targets, you're probably doing it right.
I think that's a really good point. Connecting it back to the bigger objective, right?
Yeah.
Um, Now, when you have been at Union Wireless, I imagine that you've spent a fair amount of time talking one to one, literally having calls, responding to emails,
Mm.
right? And at some point, there's also self-service, right? And you have different options available for customers. How do you think about that mix of options, including self-service?
Yeah, that's actually one of our biggest challenges and initiatives right now is making sure that there's consistency across our journeys, right? Whether that's digital, retail, contact center, tier two, whatever the case may be, that it has the same feel or cohesion to the customer. And one of them isn't drawing a customer out of the customer journey that or the customer experience that we've designed, right? Even if it's as effective as other methods, we want to make sure that, the vibe stays intact, so to speak. And so, it's just about doing the dirty work and the design and architecture of your customer experience to make sure it seems effortless or seems simple. Not easy, right? Necessarily, but kind of like when you go into an Apple store or a Nordstrom's, right? It seems second nature and it just
Hmm.
seems natural.
Hmm.
But there is an awful lot of work that goes into that design, right? And there is a ton of effort put into that architecture. And so that's where it starts, is being willing to roll up your sleeves, do the hard work, make sure that, at the end of the day, your customers are being met where they're at and they're able to solve their problems or voice their concerns. Um, in a way that feels consistent to them.
Absolutely. Um, what is one of the best techniques that you use to deliver CX? What is one of your favorite or what do you think most effective techniques?
Um, my personal philosophy is it starts with EX, right? And if you are treating your employees differently than you want them to treat your customers, you're playing a very short-term game. You
Mm,
might see some immediate results, but they won't sustain themselves. And so it has to align with how your frontline is treated, that they feel valued and that their voice is heard and that they are a meaningful contributor to your organization's targets. And if you treat them with the same level of value and respect that you'd like them to treat your customers with, then a lot of it, I don't want to say it takes care of itself, but a lot of it falls into place.
definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I think if there's an inconsistency there, um, it's going to appear in CX pretty soon,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think, even beyond the frontline team, there's a need for alignment and
Hmm.
consistency, right? Throughout the organization, but also as far as customer facing and what customers
Sure.
experience themselves. How do you kind of think about this challenge of aligning around overall CX goals? And it could be across departments, even including sales, um, even including, engineering, right? And
Hmm.
kind of deployment and all these kind of things.
Well, you have to work backwards until you find common ground with whoever you're working with, right? Sales is actually part of our care group here because we believe philosophically the two roles aren't that different, right? You're solving problems for the customer with essentially company endorsed solutions, right? And so once you work backward to find common ground, sometimes it's as basic as, well, we agree we want to gain more customers or subscribers, right? Um, then you use that as a launching point for your shared goals and initiatives, right? And it just has to start at the top of the organization, leading by example. Um, we're fortunate that, like I said, in addition to the OKR framework, some of those Patrick Lencioni organizational theory and management philosophies really play into that, where you're staying connected with your peer group, you're talking through the things that are important, you're working on those top level items and priorities, and you're staying aligned with how those things get achieved.
Got it. You've mentioned Patrick Lencioni twice. Is there like a book or is there something more that you can tell us about that? So if people are in the audience are listening and they want to go and learn more.
Yeah, I mean the ideal team player is a great place to start, right? That hungry, humble, smart personality type, somebody who is, quick to give credit to somebody else. They're aggressively, evangelizing for your organization and they're making intelligent decisions on your behalf. I think that if you can design your recruiting platform around those values and those personal um, values or morals, then you're doing a good job.
Got it. Um, yeah, thanks for that. I think other people in the audience will benefit from checking that out. Um,
It
one of the
really had a
things,
trans sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. It really
go
had a
ahead.
transformative impact on how the directors and the leadership team at Union worked together. Um, Almost every single one of the directors of our organization came up through our organization. And so we were hired from within. We found that in our part of the world, the job description, I don't want to say it's the easier part of the job, but cultural fit, willingness to work as part of a team, and shared values really are those intangibles that tip the scale in your favor, right? And those are the things that when you are recruiting somebody from outside the organization, it takes a while to uncover where they stand with those. And so we found more success promoting from within those individuals who personify our core values and have the aptitude to learn the job description.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's really powerful. You mentioned that in at Union Wireless in customer care, there's kind of a blend of sales and support that's happening.
Mhm.
Um, and typically, I guess traditionally we could say in a business there are separate departments, and support is looked at as a cost center,
Mhm.
and sales is looked at as a revenue generator, right? And and so the incentive is to reduce the cost of support to increase margin, right?
Hmm.
Um, Now, intuitively, we know that support has an impact on revenue, right? You gave the example earlier of a customer who became a kind of a super promoter. And obviously, if they're telling their friends and convincing other people to sign up, that's
Yeah,
going to be a win for revenue for the business. So
sure.
how do you think about support's impact on revenue?
I think that it's hard to measure, to be honest with you. You're absolutely right. Intuitively, we all know that there's value there. But I guess I would say most of us have seen the opposite prove true, right? Where customer experience or support failure has led to, market share diminishing gains or market share loss enough times that we know, even though it's not a one-to-one support expense to revenue calculation, by knowing the impact of its absence, I think most people agree that there's value there.
Right, right. Yeah, I think it is very hard to measure. You could look at things like how many cancellations happen,
Yeah.
right? You can look at some different things that are a little bit more measurable there, but I think there's this ongoing challenge around that. And it's hard because I think especially you have to kind of integrate almost different tools and different data sets to really have a clear picture, right?
Yeah, we dig pretty deep into our NPS results, and we found even if a user has had a negative experience with our service somewhere along the way, that even like 90% of the time or greater, they will identify the support side of the house as a net positive in their experience with Union. And so by providing those types of metrics, it's we've never had an uphill battle in selling quote unquote the value of providing exceptional support. That's so ingrained in our history and who we've been in the communities that we serve that if anything, it reinforces what we all believe to be true. But it definitely helps.
Got it. Um, Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about what you see coming over the horizon, what you see as the future. And first, inside of that, can you talk a little bit about maybe some things that you're excited about at Union, or some things that you're thinking about in the next year, next couple of years potentially?
Yeah, just incorporating more of those self-service and digital tool sets. I think that there's so much to evaluate, and there's so many different people who are telling, or organizations or groups that are saying, we're going to solve this problem, we're going to solve that problem, that you really have to dig through it to find the people whose philosophies align with yours. And we've been fortunate that we're in the infancy stages with a couple of organizations that we're very excited to partner with that will help us tip the scales or get us over that tipping point.
Got it. And I imagine as you're evaluating these different options, AI is one of the things that you're probably thinking about, how to use it, how to bring it in a way that makes sense. Again, that as you said, that it aligns with
Yeah.
the priorities, the values that you have. How do you think about the role of AI, and are there some ways that, maybe beyond the obvious, if you have think of like an AI chatbot or something, there's some
Mhm.
obvious examples out there. Are there some other ways that you're thinking about AI?
Yeah, I mean, the intelligent kind of supplemental support tools are really incredible. I mean, they can measure customer emotion. They can provide the associate insights into maybe the past several interaction a customer may have had with us, either digitally or in person. And in some cases, provide examples of customer who have gone through similar portions of the journey and what that individual user's next likely need may be. And so it's helping us shift away from a first contact resolution model to a next issue resolution model, which results in longer term, greater retention, greater CSAT and NPS scores. And we found a great value there because they help us to supplement our legacy of this relationship-based experience, enhance those interactions that we have with the individual, but it doesn't seem to the subscriber that we're passing them off to a digital lower cost tool. And so we've had uh, we're most excited about those types of tool sets.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I think the potential there is huge because typically, as you kind of alluded to, if a customer feels like they've been diverted, or right, there's this term deflection, right? If
Hmm.
they feel like they've been deflected into uh, you know, an automated solution, that's typically viewed as a negative thing, and it's not what the customer actually wanted. Um, but sometimes, with the right tooling and with the right setup, that can be actually a positive, right? It might be more efficient, or maybe there's a preemptive component of that, right? Solving the next solution, providing the next solution in advance. Um, how do you think about that, like this idea of businesses not necessarily giving customers what they want because it's an efficiency thing?
Can you ask that again? Maybe I lost you along the way somewhere.
Sorry, bit of a tough question.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my wording here could be better.
Yeah.
So basically, I think, you know, there's this idea of the customer is always right, right? But
Yeah.
sometimes the business wants the customer to want something different,
Yeah.
right? You want to resolve a case faster than the customer maybe wants it to be resolved.
Hmm.
You want to use an efficient tool to save time and save money as a business. And historically, that's meant a worse customer experience,
Yeah. I gotcha.
right? But how do you think about that kind of legacy of these tools having a negative essentially for the customer, and then the opportunity moving forward?
Yeah. Well, the full quote is actually the customer is always right in matters of taste. And so what it actually means is that in terms of what they would like, they're correct, right? It doesn't mean that you subject your team members to instances of abuse or mistreatment.
Sure.
But I think that there's probably a ton of examples, and I don't want to call any organizations out specifically where companies asked the customer what they wanted. So the one example I'll use is an organization that's no longer in business, right? Barnum and Bailey asked their customers what they wanted. And they said, well, we don't want elephants to be in the shows anymore. It seems like they're not enjoying themselves, essentially, right? And so
Hmm.
Barnum and Bailey removed elephants from their show, and then people stopped coming. And now they're out of business. And so I think that you can go down the rabbit hole of asking the customers what they want, um, to the point where it's a detriment. And so it's our job as experts in the fields that we've chosen to be in to know what is likely to make your customer's life better or easier, right? And then provide that. And so it's not a matter of telling a customer, no, 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 you don't know what you want. That's the worst place you could put yourself. But it's a matter of presenting that to them in such a way that maybe they don't even know that what they're currently experiencing is a problem yet, and presenting them the alternative as either an efficiency or time savings, or just potentially a better user experience, right? So you don't want to be preaching at them that you know better than they do. But at the same point in time, we should be the experts in the field, in our fields. We are telecommunications experts. We know what's around the corner in terms of network transformations and network progress and what's going to be available to our users in the future. And so it's our job to interpret those industry evolutions and how they can best suit our different customer profiles or segments, whether that's by demographic or geographically. Um, they're all going to have different expectations, and it's our job to tailor those solutions to be best suited to those expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a role there of expertise and kind
Hmm.
of knowing beyond the surface, right? Knowing beyond the first things the customer says, and being able to see the kind of the deeper pattern there, right?
Yeah.
Um, One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot recently is with the rise of some of these really powerful tools, with the rise of the AI options out there, um, the role of knowledge management becomes more and more important. And I see that trend continuing.
Yeah.
Um, would you agree with that? And how do you kind of think about knowledge management, in the current environment and looking to the future?
Yeah, I think we've all experienced that to one degree or another, right? And it's tedious. And it's cliche, but it's cliches are that because they're true. It's the old garbage in, garbage out, right? And I think that it's the most critical challenge of our work that we're facing right now. And we have to be willing to invest the time and resources um, into these new tool sets if we want them to have the intended results. Right? There's no shortcut, and there's no other way to do it. And so that's probably going to be the differentiator between best in class and average CX organizations over the next few years is those who have made the upfront investment to ensure that their knowledge management is done at the highest level.
Definitely. And I think that there's a whole skill set around that, or even multiple skill sets. And I think there's going to be different roles. And I think that the customer support organization, the prototypical, perfect customer support organization of the future
Hmm.
is going to have an additional emphasis on these roles around data and around knowledge management, around
Yeah.
um, having visibility into the right things that you can use to make improvements, right? Um, how do you think about the role of customer support changing and the skills required?
Um, Boy, that's a really good question. I think that at the end of the day, the skills will probably stay relatively static in terms of the core competencies, your ability to connect with another individual, build a relationship, establish trust, establish credibility. Um, and then there will be this other kind of not ancillary, but alternative component of being vocal enough to provide feedback to other members of the organization or within members of your own care organization that help expand that knowledge base that you're working to build. And so, not only somebody who's your prototypical caretaker, but somebody who's also willing to pull the stop lever when something's going wrong, right? And
Hmm.
when they see something is amiss, they're the first ones to raise their hand because engagement is engagement, whether it's negative or positive feedback from your front line, right? And so both should be valued equally. But I think that's going to continue to gain more and more value as we go through the next really just probably couple of years, if that, right? As we're all trying to race towards the most effective CX possible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Really
Um,
audience experience, right? Yeah.
I see. That's an interesting way of thinking about it. Audience experience. Okay. Um, Now I want to start to kind of wrap up the episode today. It's been a great call so far. I have two more questions for you.
Sure.
Um, what is the biggest misconception? What is the biggest misconception that people have about CX in your mind?
Um, that you can be successful without an equally effective employee experience. That's what it all comes back to, I think. And so um, it has to start with how your employees, how valued they feel, because they will only pass through something that's not in alignment with that for so long.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, succinct and clear. And I don't think
Yeah.
anybody can really argue against that.
Yeah.
Um, and one more question here. If you're giving advice to yourself, when you got started in CX, or you're giving advice to somebody who's just getting started in their journey in CX, somebody who's looking to improve their skills, what's the biggest tip or advice you have for people looking to improve?
Go interview your customers, right? Traditionally and typically speaking, if I'm speaking with a end user, something has gone wrong, right? I mean, it's had to have escalated a handful of times. And so go insert yourself into community groups, into social settings or social spheres where you can ask questions and have those meaningful conversations with your users and hear what their experience has been like. And don't hesitate when you're going through, your CSAT surveys or your NPS surveys to pick up the phone and just make a couple of phone calls to get some additional insight. Because we're reading all of these scores and all of these experiences as data sets, but there's a human on the other end of that, and they have a story to tell. And so whether they left that call, incredibly satisfied or less than that, there's a story to tell, and hear those stories and take the time to listen to those people, because not only will you enrich your organization's relationship with that individual, but you'll get better and you'll then have some content to help better your frontline teams as well.
Absolutely. That was great. Thanks a lot, David.
Yeah.
And that'll be all for our episode today of the CX Files. We hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.